Welcome to Great Rivers of Europe. In this series, we're exploring the remarkable river system that, these days, allows you to sail continuously from Budapest in Hungary all the way across Central Europe to Amsterdam and the North Sea. The Danube-Main-Rhine river system not only passes through European landscapes as varied as fertile floodplains and precipitous gorges, but also 2 millennia of history, creating a rich tapestry of culture, architecture, art, and cuisine. This 11,000-kilometre journey offers a visual smorgasbord with so many exceptional experiences, all packed into such a short space of time. But it's only in recent times that the 3 rivers have been fully linked, enabling continuous navigation and cruising from Budapest to Amsterdam, opening up a direct route from the Black Sea to the North Sea. Welcome to Great Rivers of Europe. While the many attractions along the Danube have been the focus of our series so far, no visit to Austria would be complete without heading to arguably its most famous city after Vienna, Salzburg. To get to Salzburg, we've headed north, close to the German border. But we haven't completely lost contact with the Danube. Salzburg's river, the Salzach, eventually joins the River Inn, which in turn flows into the Danube at Passau, and we'll be visiting there a little later in the episode. There are many good reasons for visiting Salzburg. Its stunning location at the northern boundary of the Alps, its almost perfectly preserved Baroque city centre, which mostly survived World War II bombing, its important place in classical music as the birthplace of Mozart, and let's not forget, it was the setting for one of the world's most loved movies, The Sound of Music. Salzburg's early fortunes came from mining salt. The name translates as Salt Castle, and the river Salzach was used to transport the mineral out on barges. The growing settlement also became a religious centre, growing in importance from the 7th century onwards, and eventually becoming an ecclesiastical principality which lasted until 1803. The huge wealth generated by the salt mining, combined with the aesthetics of several of the prince-bishops, has resulted in the collection of churches, squares and palaces that make Salzburg such an interesting experience. At the end of the 16th century, one of these bishops, Wolf Dietrich von Reithenau, dreamt of turning Salzburg into the Rome of the North, starting with a cathedral that would rival St. Peter's for size and magnificence. Wolf also built the stunning Mirabell Palace, situated on a prime site right beside the Salzach River and completed in 1606. It was designed simply as a pleasure palace for Wolf and his mistress and away from prying eyes. Schloss Mirabell has been remodelled and rebuilt a few times since Wolf's day. He fell from grace in 1612 and was subsequently evicted. It was badly damaged in Salzburg's Great Fire of 1818 and subsequently restored in the neoclassical style. Today, it's regularly used for concerts and weddings, which are held in the soaring marble hall. The palace's Baroque period gardens are also stunningly beautiful, geometrically laid out and full of sculptures, water features and colour-planted flower beds. The Emperor Franz Joseph I decreed the gardens should be open to the public, and today they are one of Salzburg's most popular attractions. A number of scenes from The Sound of Music were filmed here. It's very likely that the von Trapp family are as much a drawcard for visitors to Salzburg as its most famous son, Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart. The Sound of Music was shot in only 11 weeks during 1964, almost entirely using locations in or around Salzburg, although not all these were the actual places associated with the von Trapp family's story. However, the family itself was very real. Maria was a trainee nun, and in 1927 she met and married an Austrian naval officer, Captain Georg Ludwig von Trapp. And yes, he was a widower with 7 children. He was also no fan of Hitler, and this would eventually force him and his family to flee Austria. The movie is based on Maria von Trapp's memoir. She died in 1987 and remains hugely popular to this day. Devotees of the film will certainly recognise the locations in the Mirabell Palace Gardens. The famous Do-Re-Mi scene was shot at the Pegasus Fountain, but also the Residenzplatz Square in Salzburg's centre and the Leopoldskron Castle. For the great many devotees of Mozart, the obvious place to start is here, the house at number 9, Getreidegasse, where the composer was born on the 27th of January 1756. Back then it was called Hagenauer Haus, but today it's known as the Mozart Geburtshaus, and since 1880 it's been a museum dedicated to the composer. The Mozart family lived on the 3rd floor, and these original rooms have been preserved, although some remodelling has been required to cater for the many thousands of visitors who visit every day. The young Wolfgang grew up here with his parents and a sister, Nannerl. His father, Leopold, was also a musician, an accomplished violinist as it happens, and recognised true genius when he saw it. The child was giving concerts locally from the age of 5, and not long after, Leopold began organising tours to other parts of the country. The museum's extensive collection includes many of Mozart's own instruments, including his Klotz concert violin in original condition, all sorts of memorabilia, letters, musical scores, and many paintings depicting him at various stages of his life. In 1773, the Mozart family moved to a bigger house on the other side of the river Salzach, no doubt thanks to the income generated by the talents of their youngest child. Located on Marktplatz Square and originally known as the Tanzmeisterhaus, the Dance Master's House, the family's spacious 8-room apartment is now another fascinating museum called the Mozart Wohnhaus, which simply means the Mozart residence. Mozart is, not surprisingly, everywhere in Salzburg. Here he is in what became known as the Mozartplatz after this statue was erected. On that day, in September 1842, Franz Xaver Mozart conducted the Festkantate in honour of his father. You can also take a bit of Mozart home with you, the only challenge being which one of the many souvenirs to buy. Or you can sample the delicious Mozartkugel or Mozart Balls chocolate. Yes, really. Mozart was a well-known coffee lover, and he was a regular here at the famous Café Tomaselli, located right in the middle of Salzburg's old town quarter. The original was established in 1700, making it Austria's oldest Viennese-style coffee house. It has been run by the Tomaselli family since 1852 and has its own bakery on site, which makes many very tempting cakes and pastries. Another treat for music-loving visitors to Salzburg are its many music festivals. The premier event is undoubtedly the Salzburg Festival. The idea was apparently dreamt up over coffee at Tomaselli's. The Salzburg Festival was first held in 1920 and runs for a whole month during the summer, attracting both performers and visitors from all over the world. A major venue for the Salzburg Festival is the House of Mozart Concert Hall and Opera Theatre, which was first opened in 1925 as the Kleines Festspielhaus and was renamed in the composer's honour in 2006. It's also the main venue for the annual Easter Festival, which is dedicated to classical music and, in particular, opera. It was established in 1967 by the German conductor Herbert von Karajan, along with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. In 2011, the equally famous Staatskapelle Dresden took over as the orchestra in residence, and this festival continues to attract some of classical music's biggest stars. Should you tire of Mozart and music, Salzburg has plenty more to offer. The beautiful old town quarter is compact and can be easily explored on foot. Or you can follow a long-held tradition and take a tour in a horse-drawn carriage. The many bridges over the Salzach offer great views of the city centre and of the majestic Festung Hohen Salzburg Fortress complex, which is hard to miss no matter where you are. It's another legacy of Salzburg's big spending prince bishops, who, from the 1400s through to the 1600s, greatly expanded on the original 11th century fort to create what amounts to a walled hilltop village. Today, it's the largest fully preserved fortress complex in Europe. For anybody who doesn't fancy the 20-minute hike uphill, Festung Hohen Salzburg can be easily reached by cable car, and it's well worth the trip for the expansive views across Salzburg and its surrounds. From here, it's also easy to see the original strategic importance of this site. Any approaching enemy would have been hard to miss. Salzburg is also a wonderful place to visit in winter, as you're guaranteed snow, which turns an already beautiful city into something magical. There are many winter markets, including a big Christmas market which fills the historic residence square. Here you'll find beautiful Christmas decorations, traditional seasonal fare too, such as baked apples, hot roasted chestnuts and gingerbread hearts. The city has another close link with Christmas because not very far away is Oberndorf, and it's here that the much-loved carol Silent Night, Stille Nacht, was heard for the first time, performed after a Christmas Mass on the 24th of December, 1818.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required.
With both Vienna and Budapest trying to outdo each other for history, culture and beauty, it's easy to overlook another of the great cities on the Danube, Linz. Linz is the third largest city in Austria and the provincial capital of Upper Austria. a role it's held continuously since 1490. Interestingly, Linz is essentially located right in the geographical centre of Europe. Next stop on the Danube after Melk. Like many of the towns and cities along the Danube, Linz was developed by the Romans, who arrived in around 400 AD and called it Lentia, although settlement dates back even earlier. The name Linz was first recorded in 799, and it's again the transport and trade made possible by the river that saw Linz grow into a major commercial centre. In fact, Linz became so important in 1489, the Habsburg Emperor Friedrich III made it the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, a status it maintained until his death in 1493. Along with the wealth came science and the arts, and among Linz's more notable citizens are the 17th century astronomer and mathematician Johannes Kepler and the 19th century composer Anton Bruckner. Kepler has a university named after him, and Bruckner a dramatic-looking congress and festival centre situated on the banks of the Danube, the Bruckner House. From 1856 to 1868, Bruckner was the organist here at Linz's old cathedral, so named because, yes, there's also a new cathedral. Completed in 1683, this Gothic-style church was the cathedral for the Diocese of Linz for over 120 years, until 1909. Bruckner once stated that he felt the most at home in the organ lofts of this cathedral and the Stephanskirche in Vienna. Linz's new cathedral happens to be the largest church in Austria, which is perhaps why it took over 50 years to build, finally being consecrated in 1924. It can seat up to 20,000 worshippers, and it's also famous for its fabulous stained glass windows. Mozart came here in late 1783 and was sufficiently impressed by the city and its hospitality that he dedicated a symphony to the place. Today, Mozart's 36th symphony is much better known as simply the Linz. And in fact, there's also a Linz sonata for piano, which was written at the same time, so it looks like Mozart was smitten. The house where both of these works were written, number 17 on the Altstadt, has been preserved and is, as you'd expect, called the Mozart House. The building itself was built in the late 16th century, and there's a rather nice bust of the maestro at the entrance gate. Linz's old town quarter is centred on the Hauptplatz, or main square, the largest enclosed square in Austria. It dates back to the start of the 13th century, and today Linz is known for its many markets as well as its shopping malls. Among the many stately buildings that surround the square, with their distinctive Baroque and Biedermeier facades, is the Renaissance-era Old Town Hall. The main part of the building is from the 1670s, but there's been a town hall on this site since 1415, and the mayoral offices are still here. In the centre of the square stands the ornate, white marble Holy Trinity column. It's also known by the rather less appealing name of the Plague Column, and many Austrian towns have these monuments built to give thanks for their citizens being spared from the epidemics. Just before the medieval town of Passau, the Danube flows into the southern German state of Bavaria and becomes known locally as the Donau, which has its origins in the Black Forest region. medieval town of Passau in the state of Bavaria, just across the border into Germany, is another destination that looks even better in the flesh than the postcards. The Emperor Napoleon, who happened to be occupying the town at the time, is reported to have said, "I have never seen a town so beautiful." He was a man hard to please, so this is high praise indeed. Passau sits on the junction of a third river, the Ilz, so it's known by the locals as Drei-Flüsse-Stadt, or the City of Three Rivers. Settlement can again be traced back to Roman times and the strategic importance of this location. After a monastery was established here in the second half of the 5th century, the town gained both religious and commercial importance. The Diocese of Passau was established in 1739 and for a long time was the largest in the Holy Roman Empire. The free-spending prince-bishops built a great many lavish buildings, earning Passau the title of the Venice of Bavaria. Like Salzburg, much of Passau's wealth came from mining salt, a hugely valuable commodity before the advent of refrigeration. This helped pay for the magnificent 17th century cathedral of St. Stephan. It was designed by the Italian architect Carlo Lurago, who was also responsible for many of Prague's grand churches. The eastern side of this cathedral is late Gothic in origin, and was all that was left after a devastating fire in 1662 that all but destroyed the previous building. The reconstruction took from 1668 to 1693, during which the surviving old walls were covered up with Baroque stucco and various decorations, the work of two more highly skilled Italian artisans of the period. With all that Italian influence, it's hardly surprising that Passau's cathedral is rated alongside some of Italy's finest basilicas. For the record, it's the largest Baroque church interior in Northern Europe. It's large enough, in fact, to house the world's second largest church pipe organ. This instrument actually comprises 5 separate organs to give a total of 17,774 pipes, 233 ringing registers, and 5 carillons. Everything is playable from a single 5-manual console, which must be quite an experience for the organist. You can experience what it all sounds like, as organ recitals are held here daily from May to October. The cathedral also boasts another source of big sounds, an ensemble of 8 bells. The heaviest weighs in at a massive 7,550 kilograms and is called Purmerin, a common German nickname for very big bells, and which translates as boomer. Dominating the Passau skyline is the Fester Oberhaus, a hilltop fortress that originates from 1219. It was built not only to guard the junction of the 3 rivers, but as a show of strength for the reigning Prince-Bishop. Today, it provides a prime viewing spot over the town and the Danube. With the Danube on one side and the Inn on the other, Passau's Old Town enjoys a glorious location. It's also distinctively Baroque in appearance, as this area was also mostly destroyed by the Great Fire of 1662 and subsequently rebuilt during the latter part of the 17th century. Since then, it's all survived largely unscathed, and today the lovely riverbank promenades allow it all to be appreciated at leisure. Incidentally, the German name for the Danube is the Donau. From Passau, the river glides sedately through the Bavarian countryside, punctuated by small, picturesque villages, towards the cathedral city of Regensburg. Located at the confluence of the Danube, Naab and Regen rivers, Regensburg is another settlement that began as a Roman fort and then subsequently flourished as a religious centre. The Romans set up camp here in AD 179 and gave their new town the name of Castra Regina. The original Roman city gate survives to this day. A bishopric was established here in the latter part of the 8th century, giving Regensburg religious significance as well as a growing commercial importance. Subsequently, the city grew rapidly and by the end of the first millennium boasted a population of 40,000. In comparison, London's population at the time was only 25,000. Remarkably for any European city with such a long history, Regensburg has managed to avoid the sackings, fires and bombings that have reshaped and remodelled so many others, especially in Germany. So the city's famous Steinerne Brücke is still the original stone bridge that was first built across the Danube, spanning the river with 16 arches. Not surprisingly, this is also one of the oldest surviving bridges in Europe, construction having been completed in 1146. This bridge opened up important trade routes to the south, further boosting Regensburg's wealth and prestige, but today it's the perfect opportunity for a pleasant stroll across the Danube and also provides superb views of the historic city centre. So well preserved is the Regensburg Altstadt, Old Town, that it's a listed World Heritage Site and contains over 1,300 historically important buildings. An unmissable feature of the Regensburg skyline is the Cathedral of St. Peter. Building commenced in 1280 and wasn't fully completed until 1872, although the building was opened in 1550. Its sheer size was both an architectural and a structural challenge for the builders of the day, but it stood the test of time and is now considered one of the best examples of a pure German Gothic church. Apart from the distinctive twin towers and spires, which were added between 1859 and 1869, the rest of the cathedral's external features are completely original, including the sandstone sculptures, a few of which are now preserved inside. The interior also includes a truly magnificent silver high altar, which was added at the end of the 17th century. Regensburg's Old Town Hall, the Altes Rathaus in German, is another almost entirely original Gothic period building, construction having started in 1244. It was here that the Holy Roman Empire's Diet, a form of General Assembly, met from 1663 to 1806, another example of the city's important standing in the religious world. These three metal rods set into the wall of the Old Town Hall are something you might miss if you didn't know they were here, but they're an important little bit of history too. These were medieval tools for making measurements. The one in the centre is a foot long, the one on the right represents a yard, and the one on the left was the height of the emperor, and so was, logically, called a ruler. During the 8th century, 3 abbeys operated as independent states within the Regensburg region. This is one of them, the Benedictine monastery of St. Emmeram, which today is a real palace, the Schloss Thurn und Taxis, and is the current home of German royalty. St. Emmeram himself is buried here, along with Bavarian nobility and many of Regensburg's bishops. At the start of the 19th century, the austere abbey was converted into a luxurious royal residence, complete with flushing toilets, primarily in recognition of the Thurn und Taxis family's contributions to the church. In 1450, Franz von Taxis established Europe's first postal service in Italy, initially just to speed up communications within the Holy Roman Empire, but it was later made available to the general public. Today, the palace boasts a total of 517 rooms, covering a massive floor area of around 21,500 square metres. There are various claims to where it sits in the league of residential European palaces, but it's certainly one of the biggest. Over the centuries, the Thurn und Taxis family was involved in a number of activities, including brewing beer. Although their Regensburg brewery was sold in 1996, the Thurn und Taxis brand name continues to be used. Bavaria is known as Germany's beer basket, and more than half of the country's 1,250 breweries are based in the state. This part of Germany is also equally famous for its Wurst, or sausages, specifically Bratwurst, grilled on charcoal burners, and the historic Wurstküchel, located right next to the old stone bridge here in Regensburg, is in fact the world's oldest continuously run public restaurant. It was originally established in the bridge's works office, which became vacant after construction was finished. This means food and drink have been continuously served on this site since 1146. Today's buildings are from the 17th century, and the Wurst, made on the premises, was introduced to the menu in 1806. But this still represents a lot of sausages, especially as nowadays an estimated 6,000 are consumed every day. As the Wurstküchel also ferments its own sauerkraut and makes its own mustard, also strictly adhering to an in-house recipe, it's about as regional cuisine can get. Rarely can a history lesson be quite so tasty, and all washed down with a local Brauhaus beer. Neighbouring cities around the world all have their rivalries, and in the case of Regensburg and Nuremberg, it's all about who makes the best sausages. Don't tell anybody, but it's probably too close to call. Nuremberg is the next destination on our journey, and just a short cruise from Regensburg, we join the Main-Danube Canal. This was a huge engineering project that took around 95 years to complete, finally opening in September 1992 and enabling European river cruising like had never been possible before. The canal travels 171 kilometres, with the differences in elevation at either end requiring a total of 16 locks. The locks are operated remotely from 4 control centres. At its highest point, the canal has an elevation difference of 175 metres, so there's a huge amount of water being pumped around at any one time. Interestingly, the idea for the canal goes all the way back to the end of the 8th century, and a narrow waterway connecting Kelheim and Bamburg was actually built in the middle of the 19th century, but was eventually abandoned as the railways took over the job of moving freight. It wasn't until 1917 that plans were again revived, but this time for a much wider canal, able to accommodate the bigger cargo barges that used the Rhine. Nuremberg was established at the start of the 11th century as a fortress to protect important trading routes, including, of course, the river. It became a major commercial hub and the seat of the first Diet, or Parliament. From 1424 to 1796, the German crown jewels were stored here, and the city also became an important centre of German art, education, and culture. Consequently, in later times, Nuremberg came to symbolise a high point in German history, one that many people yearned to return to. The composer Richard Wagner alluded to this in his opera of 1868, Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg. And it was one of the reasons in the late 1920s and the 1930s that the Nazi Party chose the city for its infamous mass rallies. In fact, the Nazis had even grander plans for this place. There was to be a stadium that could hold over 400,000 people, a complex of sports fields, an area for military exercises, and this, a massive Congress hall inspired by the Colosseum's design and which would have seated 50,000 delegates. In the end, building only commenced on the Congress Hall, which remained unopened when the war started due to the lack of funds, and was subsequently never finished. Today, large parts of it remain derelict, but other areas have been put to good use, including as a home for the Nuremberg Symphony Orchestra. Since 2001, the Northern Wing has housed a museum called the Documentation Centre, which has been given a modern facade. The idea of the dramatic architecture is that it represents a symbolic spear through the Congress Hall, and so, by implication, through Nazism. Inside is a permanent exhibition called Fascination and Terror, which explores the causes, contexts and consequences of the Nazi regime, with a specific emphasis on the aspects directly related to Nuremberg, including the subsequent war crime trials between 1945 and 46. Nurembergers have been uncertain what to do with the rally grounds, which have remained untouched since the end of World War II. It's only very recently that the decision has been made to conserve certain elements in recognition that they do have historical significance. Today, this vast open space is mostly used for recreational and sporting purposes. The war trials were held here at the Palace of Justice, and there was undoubtedly symbolism involved in the decision to prosecute Nazism in this city rather than, say, Berlin. The Palace of Justice is still a functioning courthouse, and the famous Courtroom 600 remains in use, apparently mainly for murder trials. It is, however, a very important place in recent history, as the whole idea of prosecuting war crimes was born here. It had never been done before. For the record, the main trials lasted 218 days and ended in 12 executions, 3 life sentences, 4 very lengthy prison terms, and 3 acquittals. Unlike Regensburg, Nuremberg was heavily bombed during the Second World War, and around 3/4 of the historic old centre was completely destroyed. Restoration work took over 3 decades. But here in the Hauptmarkt, the traditional market square, you can still browse through traditional craft and food stalls, just has been done since the 14th century. Nuremberg is famous for its Christmas markets, when all the stalls, as well as the buildings surrounding the square, are decorated with fairy lights. But there are actually markets held here every day. And it's here that you can find out whether the locals are right about the Nuremberger Bratwurst being superior to any other. Another local delicacy is the Lebkuchen, which is a spicy gingerbread sweetened with honey and decorated with nuts, candied fruit, and a sugar icing. Traditionally, it was only baked at Christmas, but is now available all year round, and once again, Nuremberg has its own special recipe. A notable feature of Hauptmarkt is the Schönebrunnen, which translates as beautiful fountain, and at just under 19 metres tall, it can't be missed. The elaborate decoration includes 40 carved and coloured figures. According to local legend, 2 brass rings set into the fence are said to grant wishes if you spin them 3 times. Nearby is the Church of Our Lady, which was originally 14th century but was almost entirely destroyed by Allied bombing, with the full restoration only completed in 1991. The mechanical clock in the western facade chimes at midday and depicts electors processing around the figure of the Holy Roman Emperor. The only church in central Nuremberg that wasn't destroyed during the Second World War is the pretty little St. Johannes, built in the 14th century and miraculously missed in all the bombing. But this location is actually more famous for its cemetery, which was established in the 15th century after burials within the old city walls were banned. With its many rose bushes and flowers, the Rosenfriedhof, or Rose Cemetery, is quite beautiful, and the final resting place for many of the city's great and good over the centuries, including the Renaissance-era painter Albrecht Dürer and the sculptor Veit Stoss, who was renowned for his virtuosic wood-carving skills. For opera lovers, the next stop on our journey after Nuremberg has to be Bayreuth, which requires a short detour by road. However, Bayreuth actually sits on the Red Main, which is a tributary. Bayreuth might have been just another picture postcard Bavarian historic town, but for the composer Richard Wagner's decision to build an opera house here. And not just any opera house either, but one large enough to accommodate his massive productions. The town already had a very elaborate opera house, which is what attracted Wagner to Bayreuth in the first place, as at the time it was the biggest in Germany. In the 18th century, the Margravine Wilhelmina, a Prussian princess, set about turning Bayreuth into a town fit for royalty, which meant a makeover on a grand scale. Everything she had built was heavily influenced by the Baroque and Rococo styles, which makes for quite a distinctive appearance. The Opera House was one of Wilhelmina's many projects, and she spared no expense. It was designed by the famous Italian theatre architect Giuseppe Galli Bibbiena, and it boasts one of the most beautiful late Baroque opera house interiors. It wasn't quite right for Wagner though. He didn't like all the Italianate ornamentation, and while the stage was actually big enough, the traditionally sized orchestra pit was far too small to accommodate the number of players he needed. Nevertheless, Wagner really liked Bayreuth, and so, on the 22nd of May 1872, the cornerstone for his Festspielhaus, Festival Theatre, was laid on land donated by the townspeople. It's a prime site too, atop a hill that overlooks the town. It's no mistake that the theatre is visible right from the start of the long, arrow-straight road that leads up to it. The building was financed by the composer's extremely wealthy benefactor, King Ludwig II of Bavaria, more popularly known as Mad Ludwig, as a result of his many, shall we say, eccentricities. Wagner's dream opera house was completed in 1876, and the first performance was the premiere of the epic four-opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen. In the audience was a who's who of late 19th century classical music: Tchaikovsky, Grieg, Gounod, Bruckner, Liszt, and Saint-Saëns. Every year, during July and August, the Wagner Festival is held at the Festspielhaus in Bayreuth. In fact, this is the only time that the opera house is used. Every 5 or so years, a new production of the Ring cycle is produced, and the waiting list for tickets can be up to 10 years. The vast, all-timber interior of the opera house is deliberately plain. It's designed to be functional above anything else, with an emphasis on acoustics and, another Wagner obsession, uninterrupted sightlines. The seating is arranged in a single, steeply angled tier so that everybody has a clear view of the stage. Mind you, he was right, because it's a design that's since been adopted in a number of major opera houses around the world. Another unusual design element is that the orchestra pit is completely recessed under the stage, while a double proscenium arrangement gives an illusion of greater distance between the stage and the audience, creating what Wagner called the mystic gulf. At the same time as his opera house was being constructed, Wagner also had an impressive new home built in the town for himself and his wife Cosima, the daughter of Franz Liszt, whom he'd married in 1870. This imposing villa, called Wahnfried, was the Wagner family home until 1966, and it's been a museum since 1976. Wahnfried, by the way, translates roughly as delusionary peace. The lovely garden behind the house is the final resting place of both Richard and Cosima, although she outlived her husband by 47 years and died in 1930. At Wagner's specific request, the simple grey granite grave is completely undecorated and unmarked. The museum houses an extensive collection of instruments, including the kettle drums used for the world premiere of The Ring, and the Bechstein piano that Wagner had specifically designed for him, and which was used to compose a number of operas, including Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, Götterdämmerung, and his final work, Parsifal. Very conveniently for fans of classical music, right next door to the Villa Wahnfried is an equally fascinating museum dedicated to the life and works of Franz Liszt. This was also the house where the great Hungarian composer died in July 1886 at the age of 74. We're back on the Main-Danube Canal and cruising through gloriously green Bavarian countryside with its fields and forests. Ahead is Bamburg, arguably the most beautiful of Bavaria's historic towns. Cruising along the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal, our next stop is the town of Rothenburg, which is located on the River Tauber, another tributary of the Main. Our next destination is Würzburg, situated in the heart of one of Germany's biggest wine-producing regions. It's also the starting point of the romantic road, which leads us to our final destination, Amsterdam. It's not surprising that today river cruising has become such a popular way of taking a memorable vacation. It's comfortable, convenient, and it gets right into the heart of destinations without airport queues, traffic jams, or waiting for your hotel room to become vacant. It's simply a brilliant way to travel. In this series, we're going to follow one of the most popular river cruising journeys in the world, sailing from Budapest to Amsterdam, with a couple of detours in between, and sampling everything that three of Europe's greatest rivers have to offer. The Danube, Main and Rhine rivers offer a rich tapestry of history, geography, culture, art, and cuisine. Nowhere else on the planet can so much visual variety and so many exceptional experiences be packed into such a short space of time, all in unhurried luxury. This journey of a little over 1,100 kilometres cruises west through 5 countries, a couple of millennia of history, a great many stunning landscapes and vistas, and a number of Europe's grandest and most beautiful cities. For many today, it's also a journey of a lifetime. Using the Danube, Main and Rhine rivers for international trade and travel dates back to Roman times, when most of continental Europe was under the control of the mighty Roman Empire. Local trading using these rivers has occurred in many areas, even in prehistoric times. Locations offering the easiest crossing points became the sites for trading posts, and around these sprang up the settlements that have subsequently grown over the centuries into major European cities such as Budapest, Vienna, and Cologne. Over the centuries, these rivers have also had great strategic importance, serving as natural borders between warring tribes, as well as providing sites for strongholds that could be more easily defended. At many points along these rivers can still be seen the forts and castles, often perched on valuable vantage points, which are testimony to the many conflicts which punctuate European history right from the beginning of settlement. Some of these forts are now just ruins, but others have been rebuilt or restored and have become an integral part of the river cruising experience. The majestic Rhine Gorge, for example, boasts no fewer than 65 fortresses, castles and palaces dotted along both left and right banks, all along just a 70-kilometre section of the river. It's only in recent times that the three rivers have been linked, enabling continuous navigation from Budapest to Amsterdam and opening up a direct route to the North Sea. But the idea dates back over 1,000 years. Most plans were thwarted by the massive engineering challenges, although Bavaria's King Ludwig I got close with his ambitious canal works conducted in the 1830s. After the Second World War, work began in earnest. However, it wasn't until 1992 that the project was finally completed and the 171-kilometre Rhine-Main-Danube Canal was opened. There's a 175-metre variation in elevation, which has necessitated 16 locks along the route. Welcome to Great Rivers of Europe. We're starting our river travels in Budapest, the capital of modern Hungary. It's a city with a history dating all the way back to 400 BC. A narrowing of the Danube provided an easier crossing point at which the Celts set up camp. More formalised development began when the Romans arrived in 100 AD and established the fortress town of Aquincum, which quickly became the regional capital. Around 300 years later, Attila the Hun sent the Romans packing. The nomadic Magyar tribes, from whom the ethnic Hungarian people are directly descended, settled here at the start of the 10th century, and the Kingdom of Hungary was founded 100 years later in the year 1001. The next millennium has been no less dramatic for Hungary and Budapest. A lot of this time was spent under the rule of others, the Turks in the 16th and 17th centuries, and then the Habsburgs until the middle of the 19th century. Since Hungary emerged from the 40 years of communist rule following the end of the Cold War in 1989, it has worked hard to become a modern and progressive European state, and it's reflected in the cosmopolitan atmosphere of its capital. There's over 1,000 years of historical triumphs and tragedies tied up in this remarkable city. Budapest is often called the Pearl of the Danube, and also the Paris of the East. Both these descriptions provide clues about what's in store here for the visitor. It's a real surprise package of stunning architecture, magnificent views, and fascinating history everywhere you look. There's a whole stunning view along the river called the Budapest Panorama that's heritage listed, preserving its beauty. Budapest is actually made up of two cities, which grew up on either side of the Danube and remained separate until the establishment of modern Hungary in the mid-1860s. Today's Budapest came into being in 1873, and the rest of the 19th century was devoted to creating a city to rival the most progressive and beautiful in Western Europe. As the original Kingdom of Hungary was founded back in 1001, there are many, many layers of history to be discovered in Grand Budapest. The cultural legacies of the Turkish occupation in the 16th and 17th centuries, and then the Austrian Habsburgs until the middle of the 19th century, further contribute to such a rich mix of sights and experiences. Not many other European cities pack quite so much into an area so small. It all starts with the river, of course, and today a total of 9 bridges link the older Buda section on the left bank of the Danube with the flatter Pest on the right. The oldest is the Chain Bridge, built in the mid-19th century and arguably the most impressive. It was considered a major engineering feat at the time, as it had to span a little over 300 metres of water. In fact, before this, only a temporary pontoon was erected every summer, and any other crossing had to be by boat. It's at river level that the magnificence of central Budapest along both banks can be truly appreciated, including the impressive neo-Gothic style Parliament houses, the famous Fisherman's Bastion, and the immense Castle Palace complex, which today features the National Gallery, Library, and Historical Museum. It's arguably even more impressive at night, and an evening cruise on the Danube is a very romantic way to take in this city. These magnificent bridges take on a whole new character at night, and this grand city really does rival Paris for its sheer beauty and style. The Parliament building is probably the most published view of Budapest, and consequently, an iconic symbol of the city. It's also a symbol of the country's independence and national pride. Completed in 1902, it was modelled on London's Houses of Parliament, only a lot more ornate. The Fisherman's Bastion is also dramatically elaborate with its 7 distinctive towers. It actually isn't a bastion at all, although the city's Guild of Fishermen did once put up a bit of a fight at this location to protect their nearby fish market. Today's structures were completed in 1896 to celebrate Budapest's 1,000-year anniversary, and the panoramic views from the terraces are breathtaking. Nearby is the Matthias Church, which is one of the most beautiful in a city that has more than its fair share of historic churches. It's named after the 15th century Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, who was responsible for adding the distinctive southern tower. These colourful tiles are called maiolica, and they're ceramic with a white glaze, which is a technique that originated in Renaissance Italy. The Matthias Church is as dramatic inside as it is on the outside, full of lavish decorations and a remarkable neo-Gothic high altar. The Emperor Franz Josef was crowned the first king of a newly independent Hungary here in 1867. The period of Turkish or Ottoman occupation and then subsequent rule by Austria not only left Budapest with quite a variety of architectural styles, it also created a rich diversity of religious and cultural influences which make this an engaging, stunning city to explore. Another of Budapest's great churches, in fact its largest, is the St. Stephen's Basilica in Pest. It's dedicated to István, or Stephen, who was Hungary's first Christian king and reigned nearly 1,000 years ago. It seats up to 8,500 people, and the majestic dome was designed to rival that of St. Peter's in Rome, another of the many examples of the Hungarians matching the best that Western Europe has to offer. The cathedral took over 50 years to complete, and it's very much symbolic of a newly independent Hungary's desire to make up for lost time in establishing Budapest as one of Europe's premier cities. From here, you can see why the Castle Palace's location was chosen. Today, it's all about the commanding views, but back in the mid-13th century, it was all about defending a fledgling settlement. Virtually nothing is left of the medieval castle, but the later buildings impress with their sheer scale and scope. After the Second World War, most of it had to be either completely rebuilt or extensively restored, which took until the early 1980s to fully complete. The whole site occupies a massive 4.7 square kilometres, including the historic Castle Quarter, with its many cobbled streets and restored historic houses, giving a real feel for the Habsburg-era Buda. When a break from all the history is needed, the area abounds with century-old coffee houses and small bars. Hungary's more recent history is on display at the grimly named House of Terror. Like a number of countries sandwiched between Germany and the Soviet Union at the time, the Second World War was an unhappy time for Hungary, as was the subsequent period under Moscow's influence and control. Today's museum building was the Nazi headquarters during the Second World War. It was then taken over by the secret police in the Soviet times as a brutal prison for dissenters. Photos of the hundreds of people who died here are displayed as a stark reminder of those dark times. But the museum is also a testimony to the hope and courage that has made Hungary what it is today. More celebratory is Budapest's Heroes Square, with its towering Millennium Monument built in 1896 to mark Hungary's 1000th birthday. Today, it's considered a symbol of defiance and courage during the country's 20th century history. An aspect of Budapest that isn't so well known is that it's the only European capital that's also a spa town. There are over 120 hot springs dotted all over the city, and some of them are gloriously ornate. At the magnificent Széchenyi baths in Pest, it's possible to take a dip even in the chilliest of midwinters. The water emerges from 2 hot springs at a toasty 75 degrees Celsius. The complex is the largest in Europe, comprising 3 grand outdoor pools and 15 indoor baths. In November, the annual Night of Baths Festival allows you to go bath crawling around Budapest's winter spas. It includes a program of special events which run from 10 o'clock in the evening to 3 o'clock in the morning. Now there's a night out. Budapest is also a city of the arts, boasting among its many venues a fine neo-Renaissance opera house built by the Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph I. He insisted that it not be any bigger than Vienna's opera house, so the crafty Hungarian builders made it just slightly smaller, but a whole lot grander. No expense was spared. For example, there's 7 kilograms of gold leaf in this main auditorium. The Austrian composer Gustav Mahler was director here for 3 years from 1888. Hungary's own star of classical music is Franz Liszt, who based himself in Budapest during the latter years of his life. Liszt is celebrated with a statue at the street entrance of the Opera House. His old apartment is now a fascinating museum, with a large collection of his pianos, including concert grands, and his charming composer desk. This building also housed Budapest's original Royal Academy of Music, established in November 1875 with Liszt as its first president. Not long after his death, the school moved to new, grander premises and was renamed the Liszt Academy of Music. A statue of the great composer watches benevolently over the entrance of what is, today, one of Europe's most highly respected music schools. Hungary has produced great composers since then, the most notable being Zoltán Kodály and Béla Bartók. Kodály is probably best known for his revolutionary method of teaching children to read music, and music lovers can visit the museum that was his home in Budapest from 1924 until his death in 1967. Béla Bartók's contribution to Hungarian culture is recognised by the Bartók National Concert Hall, which is breathtaking in its dimensions and is designed to have the grand atmosphere of a Gothic cathedral. Budapest's Summer Festival, which runs from June to August each year, includes an extensive program of classical music and operatic events at venues including the State Opera House and St. Stephen's Basilica. But whatever time of the year you visit Budapest, the city represents a truly absorbing and rewarding experience wrapped up in some of the most spectacular city views to be found anywhere in Europe. A millennia of history is on show along roughly a kilometre-long stretch of the Danube, starting with the bridges which not only link places, but eras. Castle Hill combines restored palaces with expansive views across the Danube and the many delights of the extensive Old Castle Quarter, including local craft shops, boutiques, small cafes, and traditional restaurants. The grand thermal baths are a truly unique Budapest experience to enjoy, and perhaps only matched by the city's other great water-based excursion, a majestic evening cruise on the Danube. From Budapest, we're cruising further on the Danube into Bratislava, the charming and historic capital of modern-day Slovakia. A little under 120 kilometres east of Budapest, it was once part of Czechoslovakia and one of a number of new Eastern European republics to emerge out of the end of the Cold War in 1989. In this particular part of the world, it was dubbed the Velvet Revolution because there was such a peaceful transition from communism to democracy. Today's Slovakia is a progressive, modern country with a highly developed economy, so its citizens, which number roughly 5.5 million, enjoy a very good standard of living. Slovakia is a full member of the European Union, including the Eurozone. The capital is Bratislava, a city that may not be quite as well known as the others on the Danube, but it has no less a long and vivid history which has helped create the vistas and character that are now attracting a growing number of visitors every year. Rest assured, though, it's still considered very much a hidden gem. The name Bratislava was only adopted in late 1919, following the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after the First World War. In 1536, having successfully fended off the invading Turks, this became the capital of Hungary, or to be more specific, the part of Hungary not occupied by the Ottomans. It remained the capital for 258 years, flourishing under the rule of the Habsburg dynasty. Being a Habsburg royal seat had its perks, particularly under the reign of the Empress Maria Theresa in the mid-18th century, and they're still evident today. An ambitious building program produced palaces, churches, many important buildings and mansions. Empress Maria Theresa lived here during her time in Bratislava. It's appropriately called the Great Fortress, but in her day, it was more a luxurious palace than military stronghold. The lofty location overlooking the river was originally all about defence. There's been some sort of fortification on this site since around 3500 BC. Maria Theresa had the city repurposed and redesigned, plus, just for good measure, added a new palace, large gardens, and even a riding school. Unfortunately, all her good work in the main castle was destroyed by a huge fire which even spread into parts of the city. Restoration didn't begin until 1957, but the good news is that what we see today is as it would have been in the Empress's glory days. Maria Theresa also turned Pressburg, as it was known then, into an important cultural centre. The current cathedral building has its royal origins in the late 13th century. With Vienna not far away, music has always been an important part of this city's culture. Bratislava's Opera House was built in 1886 and is now home to the Slovak National Theatre. Located in the heart of the Old Town district, the Neo-Renaissance building was designed by the famous Viennese theatre architects Nando Fellner and Henrik Helmer. It's a very scenic 80-kilometre cruise on the Danube between Bratislava and Vienna. The distance is also covered by water taxi, train or by road taxi. Vienna is a city steeped in history and culture, but with a special appeal for the lovers of classical music. It's the city of Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Brahms, Mahler, Schubert, and, of course, the Strausses. Father and sons, there were actually 3 of them, all composers. The Austrian capital is another of the Danube's great cities with a very long history of settlement. The Romans were here, and during the Middle Ages, the river brought great wealth and prosperity as Vienna became an important trading centre. The Habsburgs took control at the end of the 13th century, and Vienna developed as a city of great religious significance, becoming the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. Vienna saw several periods of frenetic church building, in the Gothic style during the Middle Ages and Baroque style during the Counter-Reformation period, both greatly influencing the appearance of Vienna as we know it today. The Habsburgs added their stamp as well. The seemingly hyperactive Empress Maria Theresa oversaw an extensive building program in Vienna through the middle of the 18th century. It's thanks to her that the glorious Schönbrunn Palace, just outside Vienna, is as big and grand as it is. She had it expanded and reworked so that its grandeur rivaled that of Versailles. There are around 1,440 rooms in all, and many are huge, with clearly no expense spared when it came to the decoration, furnishing, and lighting. The most magnificent of them all is the Hall of Mirrors, where, aged just 6, Mozart performed for the Empress Maria Theresa. Mozart's other link with Schönbrunn is here, in the Orangery, which, at 186 metres in length, is the longest in the world, and was where the famous conducting duel with his arch-rival Antonio Salieri took place. Today, appropriately, the Orangery is used as a venue for classical music concerts and events. Since 1996, the site has been World Heritage listed, not just in recognition of the palace's beautifully preserved Baroque splendour, but for the particular way in which the buildings and gardens exist in such balanced harmony. A fusion of many art forms known in German as Gesamtkunstwerk. The layout of the gardens remains exactly as it was when it was first designed and created at the beginning of the 18th century. In fact, traditional 18th century techniques are still used for trimming the trees and bushes. Schönbrunn has essentially been frozen in time since 1918, when it became the property of the Republic of Austria. The palace parks include a productive vineyard, a maze, a palm house, a botanical garden, a Japanese garden, an English garden, and, of course, the main French-style formal gardens. Around a century later, in 1857, Franz Joseph I, who was the last Habsburg emperor, ordered that the medieval walls around the city be torn down. They were replaced by a broad boulevard called the Ringstrasse, on which were built numerous new public buildings in a variety of architectural styles. The Ring is very much a feature of central Vienna today, and, perhaps appropriately, the first of those new buildings erected in the 1860s was Vienna's famous Opera House. Completed in 1869, it was badly damaged by Allied bombing during the Second World War and wasn't rebuilt until late 1955. The Opera House was considered very much a status symbol for European cities in the 18th and 19th centuries. The Wiener Staatsoper, Vienna State Opera House, was built in 1869, but apparently the Viennese initially weren't very impressed. It just wasn't grand enough. Regardless, today it's one of Europe's premier opera venues with a distinguished history. Composer Gustav Mahler was the director here for 10 years from 1897. As a visitor, it's hard not to be impressed with the ornate interior, with its 3 tiers and 2 levels of open boxes. There's seating for 1,709 people and standing room for a further 560. These tickets are only sold just before a performance starts. The orchestra pit can accommodate up to 110 musicians. The city's modern trams are the perfect way to explore the city via the Ringstrasse. Vienna's grand 19th century buildings, including the museum quarter, are a must for any lover of either history or the arts, or both. Vienna's museums are among the best in the world. The city's famous museum quarter, known simply as MQ by the locals, includes the Leopold Museum, which is a great place to get to know the famous Austrian artists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, such as Egon Schiele and Gustav Klimt. The nearby Museum of Modern Art, better known as MUMOC, which is derived from its German name, houses a collection of 10,000 modern and contemporary artworks, including Andy Warhol, Pablo Picasso, Jasper Johns and Roy Lichtenstein. The good news is that the MQ complex also includes many bars and cafes, so there's a chance to feed the body as well as the mind. Vienna is, of course, well known for its coffee houses and cakes, a tradition which dates back to the 1680s. The Viennese were the first to add hot milk to freshly brewed coffee, which reduces the intensity of the flavour, and today it's called a Wiener Melange. It's a toss-up between which is the more famous Viennese cake, the crispy and fruity Apfelstrudel, or the chocolatey Sachertorte. Another not-to-be-missed Viennese food experience is the sausage stand, or Würstelstand, which are to be found all over the city. One of the most famous is, in fact, not far from Vienna State Opera House. And of course, there's an equally famous sausage named after the city, the Wiener. It's as much a part of Vienna's culture as art, music, and the Danube. As it has always been, at the heart of Vienna is the Stephanplatz, the St. Stephen's Square. This square takes its name from the magnificent Cathedral of St. Stephen, with its distinctive roof of coloured tiles, all 250,000 of them. The tile pattern features the double-headed eagle of the Habsburgs. It was completely destroyed by fire during the Second World War and has been painstakingly rebuilt. Many of the Habsburg rulers are entombed in the cathedral's catacombs. The real highlight is this stone pulpit, located in the nave rather than the chancel, so the preacher could be better heard in this vast space. It's said that Beethoven realised he was completely deaf when he saw birds fly out of the bell tower, so he knew the cathedral's bells were tolling, but sadly, he couldn't hear a thing. The scale and grandeur of this cathedral reflects Vienna's importance in the Roman Catholic Church of the 14th and 15th centuries, indeed, of the wider Germanic civilization at the time. Mozart was married here on the 4th of August 1782, and just 9 years later, it was here that his requiem was conducted, in December 1791. From around the middle of November, the city and Stephanplatz are transformed into Vienna's many famous Christmas markets. There are around 16 major Christmas markets at sites throughout the city, and they are still run as they have been for a couple of 100 years, selling traditional arts and crafts, as well as a huge range of Christmas fare, from roast chestnuts to warming punches. The Hofburg, a grand palace right in the middle of Vienna, is home to the Spanish riding school. One of the year-round attractions here is the famous Lipizzan horses and their captivating ballet of the white stallions. The school is dedicated to preserving the fine art of dressage, and it takes many years of training to achieve this level of great precision. The palace dates back to the mid-16th century and was the residence of the Habsburgs for over 600 years, including accommodation for the hundreds of imperial horses. At one stage in the 17th century, they shared the space with a collection of 1,400 very valuable paintings. For several centuries, the performances were staged only for royalty and their guests, but were opened up to the general public after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918. It's not only the horses that lived royally at the Hofburg. Each member of the royal family had their own lavish apartments in the many wings of the palace. The lavish living quarters of the Emperor Franz Josef and his wife, Empress Elisabeth, have been beautifully preserved, providing a glimpse into what it would have been like to be part of one of Europe's most powerful and richest dynasties. Also in the Hofburg is another remarkable treasure, the Austrian National Library, which houses a massive archive of around 12 million books and manuscripts, a great deal of it collected by various kings and queens over the centuries. It's the biggest Baroque-era library in Europe, and in its breathtaking main hall are displayed 200,000 volumes, including a very large collection of Martin Luther's Reformation-era writings. Royalty is also to thank for another of Vienna's big attractions. The Prater was once a royal hunting ground, but today it's a huge amusement park situated right alongside the Danube. But its crowning glory is the Wiener Riesenrad, a 65-metre tall Ferris wheel that's become an iconic symbol of Vienna and provides stunning views to the city. You really can't go far in Vienna without running into classical music. It was that remarkable woman, the Empress Maria Theresa, who really promoted the city as Europe's music capital, and that was particularly good timing for the young Mozart and his family. A stone's throw from the Stephanplatz is the apartment where Mozart lived as a young man and where he wrote one of his most famous operas, Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro. It's now known as the Figaro House, and of course it's one of the city's most popular museums. Much is made today of Mozart dying penniless, but there were times in his life when he was doing very well financially, such as when he lived here in this quite spacious apartment in Figaro House, an expensive part of town even back in 1784. You really can't escape Mozart in Vienna. Here's the Café Mozart, a tribute to the musical coffee lover, his statue in the Burggarten, and this glorious memorial in the city's Zentralfriedhof cemetery. Here you'll also find the graves of Brahms, Beethoven, Schubert, and another composer who is inextricably linked with Vienna, Johann Strauss II. This is the museum dedicated to the composer who became known as the Waltz King. And this is where he wrote his most famous waltz, the Blue Danube. First performed in Vienna in February 1867, its full title is On the Beautiful Blue Danube, and it's undoubtedly one of the most recognisable pieces of classical music ever written. At a festival celebrating his life's work in 1894, he declared, "My beloved city Vienna, in whose soil is rooted my whole strength, in whose air floated the melodies my heart drank in and my hand wrote down." Ironically though, at the time Strauss wrote On the Beautiful Blue Danube, the river didn't actually flow through the centre of the city. To mitigate the devastating floods which were a problem in medieval times, the main arm had been diverted away, and it wasn't until massive canal works were completed in 1875 that the river's flow could be controlled. For over 300 years, the Liechtenstein Garden Palace has been privately owned by one of the oldest noble families in Europe, the princely family of Liechtenstein. The palace has been restored to its former glory and is at the heart of Vienna. The luxurious ambience of the Liechtenstein Garden Palace, Museum and Gardens creates moments to remember and conveys an impression of former aristocratic life. Another of this city's great gifts to music is the Vienna Boys Choir, which was originally established at the end of the 15th century, but the modern-day ensemble was founded in 1924. Today, it's the best-known boys' choir in the world, and typically they perform around 300 concerts each year, in between their love for football. On this high note, we're now sailing west out of Vienna and we'll be cruising one of the most beautiful regions of Europe, the Warschau Valley. First though, a short but very worthwhile detour to a place that's been variously called a miniature Prague and a fairy tale town. Welcome to Český Krumlov in the south of the Czech Republic. It's only small, the population is around 14,000, but when it comes to sheer visual beauty, it's very highly concentrated. It's situated on another great river, the Vltava, which flows through the region once known as Bohemia. In fact, the Vltava loops through Český Krumlov several times, making it very much an integral part of the town's scenery. In summer, a particularly popular adventure activity is kayaking down the river, which can take an hour to finally arrive in the town centre. It also provides many fun challenges while weaving through the river bends. The Great Vltava eventually flows all the way into the beautiful Czech capital of Prague and all the captivating sights of this truly wonderful city. Český Krumlov's 13th century Gothic-era fortress was given a Renaissance-style makeover by Italian architects in the 16th century, transforming it into one of the grandest palaces in the country. It's the centrepiece of this historic town. By far the biggest attraction of Český Krumlov is that it's been largely untouched since the 18th century. Remarkably, for anywhere in Central Europe, it has mostly avoided floods or fire, been spared the destruction of wars, and also survived the neglect of the communist-era regime, so the town looks almost exactly as it did over 300 years ago. Not surprisingly then, it's been a World Heritage listed site since 1992. It only takes around 20 minutes to walk from one side of town to the other. However, you will be constantly stopping to take in everything that's packed into this truly remarkable place, fighting your way through the legions of tourists who visit every summer. Coffee shops, restaurants, and wine bars are further distractions, especially on a perfect summer's day. Back on the Danube, we're travelling through another comparatively small region that also has more than its fair share of scenic attractions. For the 30 or so kilometres that the river winds its way through the Wachau Valley, the scenery never scores anything below the rating of spectacular. But the Wachau is also rich in legend and folklore, and its medieval monasteries, abbeys, and fortresses can be seen along either bank of the river. Settlement of the valley dates all the way back to the Stone Age. The climate and soil have proved to be perfect for the production of fine wines, especially whites made from the Grüne Veltliner grape. The idyllic town of Dürnstein is popular with visitors to the Wachau and isn't just about the local wine. Settlement began in the 11th century, and much of the original medieval character has been preserved with its narrow streets and historical buildings. The highlight is Dürnstein Abbey, with its very distinctive looking blue and white tower. It was built in 1733 and has become an iconic landmark of the valley. Beautifully situated right beside the river, the original chapel was completed around 1372, and then at the start of the 15th century, it was greatly expanded to become a monastery, which itself was mostly rebuilt in the Baroque style seen today during the first half of the 18th century. Inside, the abbey complex is equally impressive, and the chapel's interior is exceptionally ornate, with an unusual rotating tabernacle on the high altar in the form of a globe, decorated with 44 scenes from the life of Jesus. The organ is from 1724 and has over 800 pipes. It's still used regularly for recitals. Overlooking the town are the ruins of the medieval Dürnstein Castle. It was blown up by the Swedes in 1645 and never rebuilt. During the Third Crusade in the late 12th century, it became the focal point of a famous dispute between England's Richard the Lionheart and Austria's Leopold the Virtuous. According to legend, Richard ended up imprisoned here and was only located after his manservant had travelled throughout Central Europe, singing the king's favourite song under the battlements of each and every castle he came to. When he heard the second verse sung back in response from within the walls, he knew he'd found his king. However, Richard was only released after a huge ransom was paid, the original king's ransom. Cruising further down the Danube, there's more picturesque countryside to enjoy at leisure before we soon reach the beautiful historic town of Melk. This is another settlement that began as a fortified Roman outpost and developed into an important market town. However, it's rather overshadowed by its famous Benedictine Abbey, which, over the centuries, has expanded into a huge monastic complex now considered one of the most magnificent in Austria. Melk Abbey has been continuously operating according to the teachings of Saint Benedict for over 900 years and currently serves 23 parishes. It includes a school which has 900 pupils. The ornately decorated buildings seen today were constructed during the early part of the 18th century, using the most skilled artists and craftsmen of the time. The interior of the church is of high Baroque decoration and style. Daily organ recitals are held here, an experience not to be missed. These frescoes are the work of the Austrian Baroque era painter Johann Michael Rothmeier, who was born in 1656 and was credited with bringing the Italian Renaissance north of the Alps. The high altar is made from Salzburg marble, gilded wood and gold. The many carved figures are from both the Old and New Testaments, including the church's two patron saints of St. Paul and St. Peter. Libraries were considered a key component of a monastery, second only in importance to the church itself. But the one at Melk Abbey is particularly stunning. Established in 1735, it is also still fully active, so new items are continually being added to a collection that currently numbers around 100,000 volumes, manuscripts, and incunabula, the earliest printed books. Welcome to Great Rivers of Europe. In this series, we're exploring the remarkable river system that, these days, allows you to sail continuously from Budapest in Hungary all the way across Central Europe to Amsterdam and the North Sea. The Danube-Main-Rhine river system not only passes through European landscapes as varied as fertile floodplains and precipitous gorges, but also 2 millennia of history, creating a rich tapestry of culture, architecture, art, and cuisine. This 11,000-kilometre journey offers a visual smorgasbord with so many exceptional experiences, all packed into such a short space of time. But it's only in recent times that the 3 rivers have been fully linked, enabling continuous navigation and cruising from Budapest to Amsterdam, opening up a direct route from the Black Sea to the North Sea. Welcome to Great Rivers of Europe. We are navigating the Main-Danube Canal, cruising through gloriously green Bavarian countryside with its fields and forests. Ahead is Bamburg, arguably the most beautiful of Bavaria's historic towns. Although a landlocked town, thanks to the canal, Bamburg has ended up with a harbour, so it's now a popular stop for the river cruise ships. It also has its own river, the Renitz, so a lot of Bamburg's historic houses have superb water views. In addition to the wonderful river views that seem to be on every corner, Bamburg's architecture spans from the 12th century to the 18th, so there's quite a variety of styles, and mercifully, it largely escaped any damage during the Second World War. A particularly beautiful part of Bamburg's old centre is known as Little Venice, as the tightly packed rows of small, half-timbered houses, once fishermen's cottages, seem to be built on the river itself. Actually built over the river is Bamburg's iconic old town hall, the Altes Rathaus in German, which has its origins in the 1440s and sits suspended between 2 small bridges. The story goes that the locals were refused land for their town hall by the local bishop, so they built it in the air instead. Bamburg was established as a bishopric at the start of the 11th century, which, as always, ensured its economic growth and wealth over the following centuries. It also ensured the building of a grand cathedral, and the 13th century Cathedral of St. Peter and St. George is notable not just for its sheer size, but also its location in a wide, open square, which really emphasises its magnificence. It's a mixture of Romanesque and Gothic styles, and there are some unusual features in that it has rounded apses at either end and a total of 4 spires. Situated alongside the cathedral is the Old Court, or Alte Hofhaltung, which was originally the bishop's grand palace. This is a beautifully preserved example of 14th and 15th century architectural styles. On the other side of the cathedral square is the bishop's new residence, although new still means early 18th century. It's a typically elaborate construction which was completed in 1703 and today includes 2 galleries housing many masterpieces of Baroque and Old German art. The formal rose garden is truly glorious in summer, with the views spanning across Bamburg, and the rivers are wonderful at any time of the year. Back cruising along the Main-Danube Canal, our next stop is the town of Rothenburg, which is located on the River Tauber, another tributary of the Main. Its full name is Rothenburg ob der Tauber, which means Rothenburg above the Tauber. Its history of settlement stretches back to the Celts and the 1st century. Like many of the towns and cities across Bavaria, it was kick-started by the building of a fortress in medieval times, the eponymous Red Castle, or Roten Burg in German. Most of these ancient fortifications remain completely intact today, and the old town centre is still entered via the original 13th century city gates. The century's walkways atop the battlements provide fabulous views of both the town and its surroundings. Rothenburg boasts an historic medieval period town centre. Ironically, this preservation came about after the town became bankrupt by the 30 Years' War in the mid-17th century. Rothenburg had lost its power and influence and was largely forgotten by the outside world until the latter part of the 19th century. It was eventually rediscovered by artists who marvelled at its originality and character. Laws were then passed to make sure nothing could be changed. The old town hall dates right back to 1250, when Rothenburg was a city-state. It has a Renaissance front section added in the 1570s, which is a particularly fine example of the period's architecture. The Jakobskirche, or St James Church, was built between 1311 and 1484. It's registered as one of the stops on the famous pilgrimage route to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Inside is the famous Holy Blood wooden altar, a magnificent piece of religious art. The German sculptor and woodcarver Tilman Riemenschneider completed this in just 5 years, from 1500 to 1505. A truly remarkable achievement. Wood carvings on a slightly smaller scale are for sale in Kater Wolfhart's Christmas shop, which is located just off the market square. These exquisite handmade decorations are very typical of the region and make quite a welcome change to the mass-produced Christmas baubles. After leaving Rothenburg, we join the River Main, which flows west through central Germany for around 380 kilometres before meeting the Great Rhine. On the way, there are a total of 34 large locks, and the Main River also passes Germany's largest city, Frankfurt. Our next destination is Würzburg, situated in the heart of one of Germany's biggest wine-producing regions. It's also the starting point of the romantic road, which leads us to our final destination. So, we've now navigated the 171-kilometre long Rhine-Main-Danube Canal. We're now in the historical city of Würzburg, situated on the River Main and in the heart of one of Germany's largest wine-producing regions. Next, we'll continue heading west to finally join the mighty River Rhine at Mainz. A spectacular visual treat awaits as we travel through the dramatic Rhine Gorge, with its castles, myths and dramatic riverscapes at every bend. Then we'll be sailing on into the canal city of Amsterdam. Linking the interior with the coast, Europe's rivers became a lifeline for travel and trade, but they also quickly became strategically very important. Crossing points and defendable positions were all jealously guarded, Centuries later, many of these are now great cities. Würzburg started out as a Celtic fortress town dating back as far as 1000 BC. The imposing fortress Marienberg now stands on the original site. You can see why this commanding location was of such strategic importance. Unfortunately, medieval fortifications were no match for World War II bombers, and sadly around 90% of Würzburg's historical centre was destroyed during Allied raids in early 1945. Like many other German towns and cities, it has been meticulously restored. Würzburg has also long been a religious centre, and the first diocese dates back to the middle of the 8th century. There's been a lot of church building since then, and today the city skyline is dotted with numerous spires and towers. All the major eras of great church architecture are here, from Romanesque through Gothic and Renaissance to Baroque. Particularly notable is the ornately decorated capella situated on a hill opposite the fortress. To give its full title, this is the Pilgrim Church of the Visitation of Mary. It was built between 1748 and 1750 by the famed German architect and engineer Balthasar Neumann. The interior is an impressive work of art too, and includes frescoes by the artist Matthias Günther. The chapel's courtyard provides stunning views across the city and river. The capella features a pilgrimage chapel, and from the banks of the River Main, it's accessible via a steep lane marked with the Stations of the Cross, surely challenging the stamina of the faithful. Rather more extravagant is another Grand Prince Bishop's residence, the Baroque residence. It's a vast palace complex constructed between 1720 and 1744, another creation of Balthasar Neumann, but with the elaborate external decoration of the Italian Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. The finest craftsmen of the day were hired to make the residence truly memorable. It was almost entirely destroyed by Allied bombing, so remarkably, what we see today is a very faithful restoration. The Prince Bishops lived well, and beneath the palace is a complex of tunnels and huge wine cellars dating back to 1128. To give some idea of the size, guided tours can take up to 3 hours, but you do get to enjoy a very nice glass of Franconian wine at the end. The residence also boasts extensive formal gardens. They took 15 years to complete, from 1765 to 1780, maintaining essentially the same layout ever since. Centuries later, they can still be enjoyed by locals and visitors alike, and are considered some of the finest examples of Baroque period court gardens. More recently, it's been the location of many movies, including the recent remake of The Three Musketeers. Würzburg's Alte Mainbrücke, or Old Main Bridge, links the old town with the fortress Marienberg. It was completed in 1543, and the statues of saints and local heroes featured were added in the 18th century. It's very apparent what this region is most famous for. Grapevines have been grown along the banks of the Main for over 1200 years. This is one of Germany's premier winemaking regions, but the quantities made are actually very small, so little is exported, even to other parts of Germany. In fact, 4 out of 5 bottles of Franconian wine are consumed within a 250-kilometre radius of where it is grown and produced. Würzburg is also the starting point of the Romantic Road, an old trade route through southern Germany which was first revived in the 1950s and today links a number of historic towns and sites to help promote tourism. All the stops on the Romantic Road aim to provide visitors with a real taste of German culture, history and scenery. After a short cruise along the romantic road, we reach our next destination, Wertheim, another town that came into being because of the strategic importance of the location. Situated on a spit of land at the confluence of the Main and the River Tauber, in the days of city-states, this was valuable both commercially and militarily. Settlement began in the 7th century, but the town really started to flourish after the first fortress was established on the left bank of the Main in the 12th century. The castle has remained partially ruined, and much of the town was damaged during the 30 Years' War. This war started in 1618 as essentially a German civil war between ruling families, but eventually it also involved Sweden, France, Austria and Spain, resulting in an estimated 8 million civilian and military deaths. Today, Wertheim is serenely peaceful with its glorious river settings and medieval town centre, full of narrow lanes and distinctive half-timbered houses. Being so close to two rivers, not surprisingly, Wertheim has been flooded on many occasions, and at the Kitzsteintor, one of the original town gates, the high water flood marks have been recorded all the way back to 1595 on a wall of a garden house. Close by is the distinctive rounded red tower, which was once part of the town's fortifications. Similar watchtowers are a feature of many settlements along the River Tauber. Another captivating tower in the town is that of the Gothic-era Stiftskirche, or Collegiate Church, built in 1383. It contains 2 clocks, but the one facing the castle only has an hour hand. Apparently, the nobility didn't like to be bothered with minor details, such as minutes. Cruising on, our first port of call on the Rhine is Rüdesheim, which is in the heart of another of Germany's famous winemaking regions, the Rheingau. Grapes have been grown here since the 8th century, but there's some evidence they have been growing vines as early as Roman times. The leading grape variety is Riesling, but red grapes are grown here too, including Pinot Noir and Dornfelder. Wine is clearly a big part of life in Rüdesheim, and its main street, the narrow Drosselgasse, is packed solid with wine bars and wine shops. Not surprisingly, the Drosselgasse is considered by some to be one of the prettiest streets in Germany, which is no mean achievement, especially in this part of the country. Rüdesheim's history is a long one, with the town first being settled by the Celts. The Romans were certainly here as they had a fortified camp across the river at Bingen in the 1st century AD, but it was from the 11th century onward that the town prospered, thanks to both the river and fine winemaking. Today, the town offers plenty of attractions other than wine tasting, including the remarkable Museum of Mechanical Instruments, which houses a wonderful collection of self-playing machines. The building itself is an historic mansion dating back from the 16th century. Most of the instruments featured were made in the 18th and 19th centuries. Many of them are mind-bogglingly complex contraptions, but they all still work and are regularly enthusiastically demonstrated by the museum's owners. This scenic location right on the Rhine, surrounded by vineyards and the wooded hills of the Niederwald, has made Rüdesheim a popular holiday destination. It was a particular favourite of the German composer Johannes Brahms. 1895. Brahms particularly enjoyed hiking around these vineyards. There's now a 6-kilometre walking track named after him, the Brahmsweg, or Brahms Way, providing expansive views over Rüdesheim and the Rhine. An even better way to enjoy a panoramic overview of this beautiful location is by cable car. It's a short but spectacular 10-minute ride that starts from the edge of the town and soars across the many vineyards, including the famous Assmannshausen, to land you on a hilltop in the Niederwald Landscape Park. From here, the scenic landscape unfurls spectacularly before you. This is also the site of the Niederwald-Denkmal, an impressive monument erected to celebrate the foundation of a unified German empire following victory over France in 1871. On top of the monument stands Germania, the returned crown in one hand and the imperial sword in the other. As it so happens, Brahms took part in its grand unveiling on the 21st of September back in 1883. A short cruise from Rüdesheim, the river enters the Middle Rhine Valley, arguably one of the most picturesque 70 kilometres worth of stunning scenery in the world. It's best appreciated from the water, with visual delights gradually revealed around every bend. The wide, flat landscapes give way to deep, steep-sided gorges as the river cuts through the uplifted slate of the Taunus and Hunsrück mountains. The spectacular scenery is the result of millions of years of erosion, and in 2002, it was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. It's not surprising that these landscapes have inspired a great many artists, among them the great English painter J.W. Turner. Wagner also set his opera, Götterdämmerung, in a castle just like one of these, perched high above the Rhine. Just about every vantage point above the river is occupied by fortresses, castles and palaces. Most of them look like they'd have been very challenging building sites. The intervening slopes are taken up with vineyards, and the vines often look like they're just managing to hang on. But from here comes some of Germany's finest wines. The most famous of the many rocky outcrops along this stretch of river is the Lorelei, a seductive siren who once lured sailors to their deaths by her great beauty and enchanted singing. In reality, being the narrowest point of the gorge, this outcrop was always a danger to shipping, but the legend of the Lorelei, which originates from an early 19th century ballad, is so much more romantic. There are around 45 hill castles in the Rhine Gorge, so to be considered one of the best castles, it must mean something quite out of the ordinary. The Marksburg qualifies as the king of the castles, being a completely original medieval fortress, having never been conquered or destroyed, and never allowed to fall into disrepair. It was damaged during the Second World War, but not to the extent that compromised its originality. Consequently, it provides a totally authentic look into what life would have been like in the 13th century, complete with a great hall where there's an opportunity to experience a medieval-style banquet. Likely completed sometime around 1231, Marksburg Castle belonged to a succession of wealthy Rhineland nobility who progressively added to its defences as the nature of warfare continued to change. The 15th century ramparts were the work of a builder appropriately called John the Belligerent, and today provide a panoramic view over the river and town of Braubach, which sits in the shadows of the castle. A short cruise westward brings us right into the heart of the city of Cologne. It too has Roman origins and was founded in 38 AD as Colonia. It quickly became one of the most important settlements for the empire in northern Europe, subsequently taking on religious significance when it became an archbishopric in 784. Today, it's considered one of Germany's most livable cities. Cologne has an almost entirely pedestrianised centre, excellent shopping, historic squares with welcoming beer halls seemingly on every corner. Dominating the skyline from every angle, and especially prominent when you approach the city on the river, is the Kölner Dom, with its distinctive twin spires. Dedicated to St. Peter, it's one of the finest Gothic cathedrals in Northern Europe, and certainly the largest. For the record, at 157 metres high, it's also the tallest twin-spired cathedral in the world. The German composer Robert Schumann depicted the soaring majesty of Cologne's cathedral and the grandeur of the processional before High Mass, featured in the fourth movement of his third and final symphony, known as the Rhenish. Cologne's riverside Altstadt, the old town quarter, was not so fortunate during the Second World War. Photographs from the period show just the cathedral standing amid a sea of rubble. Nevertheless, the city's reconstruction has been very successful, recreating the atmosphere of the original laneways, market squares, and old taverns. Only a very short distance from Cologne is Bonn. In fact, the two cities share their international airport. Bonn often gets overlooked on the tourist trail, overshadowed by the attractions of Cologne, but it's well worth a visit in its own right. In recent history, Bonn is probably most known for being the capital of West Germany, or, to be more accurate, the German Federal Republic. This commenced in 1949 after the start of the Cold War and the takeover of the eastern part of the country by the Soviet Union. After the reunification of Germany in 1990, the original capital, Berlin, was reinstated. But before 1949, Bonn's history dates all the way back to the 1st century BC. Like Cologne, it was first a Roman garrison, which was later expanded into a major fortress that could accommodate a full legion. Due to the strategic importance of its location on the Rhine, Bonn was extensively damaged by Allied bombing during the Second World War, but this didn't prevent it being appointed the capital of the new Federal Republic. As with so many historic German cities, the old centre has been restored, including the Münster Basilica, Bonn Minster, one of Germany's oldest churches. Building commenced around 1050 and was completed at the same time as the foundation stone was being laid for Cologne's cathedral. The architectural style is known as Rhenish and represents a period of transition from the Romanesque to the Gothic. There's a total of 5 spires, and the unadorned west end of the basilica is actually the oldest. 2 giant modern sculptures sit in the Münsterplatz at the basilica's eastern end, depicting the heads of the Roman martyrs Cassius and Florentius, the patron saints of Bonn. Bonn's Münsterplatz also attracts pilgrims of a different sort, because in the square also stands a statue of one of the greatest classical composers who ever lived, Ludwig van Beethoven. He was born in Bonn in December 1770. The actual date of his birth isn't certain, but it's most likely the 16th, and he lived here until he was 22, when he moved to Vienna. This bronze statue was erected in August 1845 to celebrate Beethoven's 75th birthday, although by then he'd been dead for 18 years. The house where Beethoven was born is now a wonderful museum, which, not surprisingly, given the enduring popularity of his music, attracts huge numbers of visitors. The location on Bonngasse is just a stone's throw from the Rhine, the house revealing the composer's comparatively humble beginnings. Today, in this little attic room where Ludwig van Beethoven was born, stands only a bust of the composer. From this humble place came the child prodigy who would give the world 9 immense and intense symphonies, numerous wonderful piano concertos, serene violin concertos, and many sublime works for strings. Never could he have envisaged that over 250 years later, his music would still be so highly revered. A short walk from the Münsterplatz is Bonn's old market square, or Marktplatz, which dates back to the 11th century. It's slightly unusual because it actually isn't a square at all. It's more a triangle, with 3 corners rather than 4. It's still the busy heart of the city with daily markets, surrounded by historic buildings, including the ornate Baroque-styled Old Town Hall, dating back to 1737. After flowing through Cologne and Düsseldorf, the Rhine joins the River Ruhr at Duisburg. Thanks to this river network, this region of Germany was heavily industrialised, and the Rhine-Ruhr region remains the largest conurbation in the country. Then at Spijk, the Rhine turns west and enters the Netherlands, where it becomes part of the Rhine-Moise-Scheldt River Delta, the largest in Europe. Called the Rijn in Dutch, the Rhine is now at its widest, and the landscape becomes the classic flatlands that are so synonymous with the Netherlands. In fact, the name translates as the Low Countries, which is quite appropriate given 26% of the landmass is actually below sea level, and another 24% is a mere 1 metre above. We tend to think of Amsterdam as a quaint historic city full of tulips, bicycles and charming canals, which are indeed all here, but it's also a major shipping port. In fact, the 4th largest in Europe. The port dates back to the 17th century, when Amsterdam was a global centre of trade and, for a time, the wealthiest city in Europe. The Dutch were among Europe's great colonisers, creating a global empire, mostly based on trade, that included southern and western Africa, parts of India, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, much of Southeast Asia, which was collectively known as the Dutch East Indies, the West Indies, and at various times regions of both South and North America. However, the Dutch weren't as successful on these last 2 continents as their rivals, the Spanish and the Portuguese. But regardless, their empire was hugely prosperous, as the primary objective was always commercial trading rather than necessarily establishing colonial rule. Amsterdam was originally established as a small fishing village after a dam was created on the River Amstel, hence the name. It's not entirely clear when settlement began, but Amsterdam is young compared to many other major European cities. It was granted city status at the start of the 14th century and flourished as a trading port. The marshy ground necessitated that buildings were constructed on wooden piles in similar fashion to those in Venice. When the canal system was built in the early 17th century, the comparison with the Italian lagoon city was even more apt, which is why Amsterdam is often called the Venice of the North. The roughly 100 kilometres of canals in the city are arranged in 4 concentric half-circles, creating 90 islands that are all linked by 1,500 bridges. Originally built for both defensive purposes and flood mitigation, today the canals, called grachten in Dutch, give Amsterdam its unique character and atmosphere, as well as providing a leisurely way to tour the historic city centre. A night cruise on Amsterdam's canals offers a unique experience as you glide past the riverside homes, once mostly owned by the city's merchants, lit up so you can really get a sense for what it's like living on these world-famous canals. Much of the city's iconic architecture is illuminated too, as are the numerous quaint bridges. It's undoubtedly the best way to see Amsterdam's famous red light district, so called because of the red neon lights that are mostly used to illuminate the windows of the area's many brothels. Prostitution is legal in the Netherlands, but soliciting on the streets is not allowed, which is how this district came about. Back on dry land, and the most popular way of commuting around the city is the bicycle. It's estimated there are roughly 900,000 bikes in the main city area. That's more than the number of residents, with many bikes ending up abandoned or dumped into the canals. Today, Amsterdam is the capital of the Netherlands. It's the largest city with a population of just under 2.5 million in the greater metropolitan area. In the historical centre, many homes are situated right on the banks of the canals, along with the city's finest cafes and bars. Full of narrow streets, many of them completely free of traffic. Small squares, flower-filled gardens, combined with vibrant social scenes, all contribute to Amsterdam rating as one of the world's most livable cities. The canals are very much a part of everyday life. There's many a pancake house to enjoy, but as you might expect, from bulbs to blooms, tulips are in much demand and a big feature. The city is equally well known for its museums and art galleries, and the huge Rijksmuseum, or Rijksmuseum in Dutch, is one of the world's most famous. It houses over 5,000 works by the great Dutch masters, including Frans Hals, Johannes Vermeer, Jan Steen, and perhaps the greatest of them all, Rembrandt Hermannsson van Rijn. Born in July 1606, Rembrandt moved to Amsterdam in 1631, drawn by the city's booming economy and, no doubt, the potential to make a good living. Indeed, the prosperity of the Dutch Golden Age helped encourage many cultural endeavours, especially painting, resulting in a massive output of art, along with the development of many new techniques and styles. First opened on the present site in 1808, the Rijksmuseum has been expanded on a number of occasions, and the current collection now runs to over 1 million pieces of art. About 8,000 are on display at any one time. You will definitely need plenty of time to appreciate the sheer scope of what's on show here. Among the great many highlights are Rembrandt's The Night Watch, Vermeer's The Milkmaid, and Portrait of a Couple by Frans Hals. One of Rembrandt's homes in Amsterdam is also a wonderful museum located right in the centre of the old town. The original building was constructed in 1606 and the modern museum annex was opened in 1998. Rembrandt lived and worked here from 1639 to 1656, when he was forced to move house after going bankrupt. The collection comprises mostly etchings and drawings, and his studio has become accurately replicated based on original records. While Rembrandt did still enjoy some commercial success while he was alive, Vincent van Gogh is famous, or perhaps that should be infamous, for never selling a single work. However, he is now arguably the most revered of all the old masters, and his paintings today are among the most valuable. Just across the park from the Rijksmuseum, the Van Gogh Museum houses the largest collection of the artist's works anywhere in the world. Tellingly, it's the most visited museum in the Netherlands. Born on the 30th of March in 1853, Vincent Willem van Gogh is now considered one of the most important artists who ever lived. He was hugely prolific, especially towards the end of his life, but sadly troubled by severe mental health issues and the failure to find any recognition. He eventually committed suicide on the 29th of July, 1890, aged just 37. When in his mid-20s, Van Gogh lived for a short time with his uncle in Amsterdam, pursuing the idea of studying theology. But after failing the entrance exam, he moved on. It's the compelling way he managed to convey both light and colour that undoubtedly make his works so appealing. Another of Amsterdam's most important museums chronicles a darker time in the city's history, as told by a 13-year-old Jewish girl in her diary. Anne Frank was 4 when her family left Germany after the Nazi Party came to power in 1933. Fortuitously, her father Otto had been offered a job in Amsterdam, but in May 1940, the Netherlands was invaded by the Nazis and the city's Jewish population was soon subjected to increasing persecution. In early July 1942, and with the threat of internment looming, Otto Frank took his family into hiding in a concealed apartment above his office at number 263 on Prinsengracht. A number of Otto's trusted employees supported the family with food and supplies until August 1944, when an unknown informant revealed their hiding place and the family was arrested. Anne and her sister Margot were imprisoned in Belsen concentration camp, and both died there from typhus. in February 1945, within a day of each other, near the end of the war.
Need gave me the diary, which had been saved by...
Otto was the only member of the family to survive, and, finding that Anne's diary had been saved by his secretary, set about having it published. Today, it has sold over 30 million copies in 70 languages. The Anne Frank House Museum preserves the hiding place, which was known as the Secret Annex, and has been expanded to include the building next door, providing more exhibition space dedicated to a wider examination of the topics of persecution and discrimination. For lovers of classical music, Amsterdam boasts one of the finest concert halls in the world. The Royal Concertgebouw was completed in 1886, and like many of Amsterdam's grand older buildings, it sits on wooden piles, a total of 2,186 of them to be precise. Amsterdam is full of world-famous sights, but there are some hidden gems too, such as this small and very peaceful inner courtyard. It's right in the heart of the city, but hidden behind an anonymous-looking entrance door off a busy main street. It's called the Begijnhof, which translates as the House of the Begijns. The Begijns were devout Catholic laywomen who essentially lived like nuns, but had more freedoms, and so, for example, were able to own these houses, which date from the 14th century. The last of the Begijns died in 1971, but the historic houses of the Begijnhof are still lived in today by retired church lay workers. The church was originally the Begijns Chapel, which was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Completed in 1397, it is one of the oldest buildings in Amsterdam. After Catholicism was banned in 1578, an exception was made for Begijnhof, but the Begijns had to give up their chapel, which was later presented to the English-speaking Protestants living in the city, and so became the English Reformed Church. Services in English have been conducted here continuously since 1607, and today it's affiliated to the Church of Scotland, so it's also known as the Scots-Kerk of Amsterdam. Since the late 1970s, it's also become a regular venue for chamber music concerts. As demanded by city law at the time, it had to be unidentifiable from the outside. To this day, it remains hidden behind the facades of the two residential buildings. We've ticked the boxes for canals, pancakes, bicycles, and tulips, but what about windmills? For these, a trip to the River Zaans, just north of Amsterdam, is an absolute must-do. The Zaan region was home to around 600 windmill-based businesses by the end of the 18th century, making it one of the world's first industrialised areas. The Zaanse site today has a collection of 8 beautifully preserved historical windmills, all original in perfect working order. And they actually have names. There's the cat, the ox, and the spotted hen. Most were built during the latter half of the 17th century. Dutch windmills are broadly divided into 2 types: polder mills, which were used to move water during land reclamation, and grist mills, which turned grinding stones to make refined products such as flour and oils. Some windmills also served as sawmills, and 3 of these are preserved at Zaanse, one for crushing old bearing seeds or nuts, one a dye mill, and one a mustard mill. Given their role in shaping the Netherlands both geographically and industrially, one can see why the windmill has become a much-loved symbol of Dutch culture. Around 1,200 historic windmills have been preserved, and a number of these are actually still operating commercially for either drainage purposes or grinding. These three great rivers all played a significant role in Europe's industrialisation, transporting raw materials in and the finished products out. And this continues today. But as industry has changed and decentralised, road and rail networks have become more extensive. Over the years, the nature of river transport has changed. Now, with improved GPS navigation and effective environmental cleanup programs, Europe's great rivers have become holiday destinations in themselves. This has opened new ways of enjoying some of the world's most famous sites, while being continuously immersed in the landscapes, cultures, and history. There simply is no better way to travel in style, safety, and leisurely luxury. Well, we've come to the end of our journey and our series. We started out in the grand Hungarian capital of Budapest and ended in the famous city of canals, Amsterdam. Along the way, we've visited a host of memorable destinations, including Vienna, Salzburg, Passau, Nuremberg, Bamburg, and Cologne. And who could forget the awe-inspiring Rhine Gorge, with seemingly a castle and a myth on every bend? We've journeyed through many centuries to witness how much of Europe was shaped by the connections and interactions enabled by these rivers. We've witnessed how what often began as small, strategically located towns or fortresses expanded over time into great centres of commerce and culture. These great rivers facilitated travel, trade, communication, and, on many occasions, wars and disputes over territories. We've encountered royalty, composers, writers, artists, and their paintings. Along the way, we've sampled great food and fine wines with their distinctive local influences. So, on this journey from Budapest to Amsterdam, we've travelled a little over 1,100 kilometres on 3 magnificent rivers, passed through 5 countries and 116 locks, and sailed under 1,000 bridges. Let's enjoy a final snapshot of our journey, set to the German composer Robert Schumann's majestic third and final symphony, known as the Rhenish, written in 1850.